Hi everyone and welcome to episode 119 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. Now I can sound like a bit of a broken record on certain topics and I'm going to do that unfortunately for you all today, but one of my most common focuses for our clients, and it has been for our business over a long period of time, is that asset selection is the absolute key when it comes to buying property. And it doesn't really matter whether it's for a home purchase or for a lifestyle, so perhaps a tree change or sea change, holiday home, or whether it's an investment property, you've got to focus on buying the right property first and foremost. And it's looking at what those attributes are that are going to make that success, that purchase a success for you. Now, when it comes to investors, and that's what I want to focus on with today's topic, we've seen all sorts of avoidable mistakes made over the years, and it can be a really frustrating thing from our perspective, and I'm sure it's been very frustrating for clients as well. People get an idea in their head as to what perhaps their focus and their objective needs to be, and it can be a really significant mistake. And the amount of times that they get that focus in, but then not only makes them make the wrong decision around asset selection, but it also ends up meaning that they pay a premium because they think they've been able to achieve that objective. So I guess what I wanted to do today is look at what some of those mistakes are and why they're made, and how they can also be avoided as well. Now, the first one is with the wrong objective, and getting the wrong objective from the start. And what that does is it means that the attributes of the property become the wrong focus, particularly around when buying an investment property. And as I've mentioned previously, the main objective when you're buying an investment property does need to be the capital growth. But unfortunately, there are other aspects, and there's certainly other benefits of buying an investment property, and they should certainly be there, and you should certainly utilise as many of those as you possibly can. But they shouldn't be the key objective and the key driver as to why you're buying an investment property. So that's things like negative gearing, like depreciation benefits, like having a high yield. But I guess, and I'll get to this in a minute, they are absolute benefits and you want to maximise those as much as you can. They just shouldn't be the key focus as to why you're buying the property and the type of property that you're going to buy. So let's have a look at each of those. So depreciation from a first perspective, the key attributes to buying a property that gets you high depreciation benefits is buying something that's brand new, because then the people will focus typically then on buying off the plan or buying something that's a brand new build or that's been very, very recently renovated. And you can then you take those modern aspects and get depreciation benefits, so tax benefits, in other words, on that. So, but what it also means is that a large proportion of your purchase price is going to be tied up in the improvements themselves. And obviously by nature, if they're at their absolute best when you buy them, they're going to depreciate, which means if a large proportion of the value of your property is coming backwards in value, then you're losing that. So it's focusing on the wrong aspects of the property in terms of when you're making your selection, again, so which compromises your asset selection. The second is the negative gearing benefit. Now, we don't typically find with negative gearing that it makes to incorrect decisions around asset selection, because depending upon how you structure your borrowings, anyone can claim negative gearing benefits. There's obviously been discussions over the years by different governments or prospective governments around trying to focus negative gearing towards modern assets. That's why I was very much against that. I've never been such a focus on negative gearing itself. It's more when it's focused more on the influencing the asset selection, which I think can then give it a bit of an issue. But what it can do is people come and see us and they focus more on, I've got to get this negative gearing benefit as quickly as possible, and they can then rush the decision. And that's definitely not what you want to do. So focus still on buying the right asset, get the right property, and then get those negative gearing benefits. And then the third one that I mentioned was around yield. And again, that tends to focus more on the improvements. Tenants typically pay for the improvements themselves. They don't pay for land component. So as long as it's got a nice kitchen and a nice bathroom, then that's what they'll focus on. The problem with that is if it's focusing too much value again on the improvements and not enough on that underlying land value and those three components we talk about around scarcity value, land component, and variety of property, of buyer profile, then you can tend to focus more on the yield, which is not where you're going to get growth. So we tend to find yield and growth can work at cross purposes because of the nature of what drives them. So they're the issues that can. And what we find is when people get those objectives or become fixated on those objectives, then if they find the right property that achieves that, not only do they potentially buy the wrong property, but they'll pay a premium for it because they feel as though it's achieving what they needed it to. Particularly around yield, when it might be, oh, we're getting such a great yield here, this is a great property to buy. If we pay a little bit more, it's only going to pull the yield back slightly. The problem is you're probably paying for a riskier asset, which is what a high yield focused asset usually is. The next one is around emotional decisions, and that's something that you should be very wary around when it comes to buying property. And it's a discussion that we have, particularly with investors, on a very regular basis. I can't tell you the amount of times I've come and we've taken a client to an investment property that we're looking to buy for them, and they'll say, oh, but I don't like it. It's not where I would want to live. And my answer is the same every time. Well, that's okay, because I'm not buying it for you to live in. I'm buying it for an investment purpose. Now, if you do happen to like it, fantastic. I'm very happy for you. You've probably got that particular type of taste in property. But the objective here is not to buy something that you like from an investment perspective. So take the emotion out when it comes to making investment decisions. So, because what it could be is that you've got a particular taste, and when you're buying your own home, that's very much valid, and it should be a driving force. Whether it's a house style, whether it's the size of the property that might be too small for your liking, whether it's the location, it's not a suburb that you would like to buy in, or that you would like the streetscape, or the condition of the house. They're all relevant types of things, but what we do want to do is focus on the attributes that are going to achieve the growth objective that we've set out when trying to buy an investment property. So once you can do those, if you focus too much on the emotional elements, it's highly unlikely that you're going to achieve your objective. So take that emotion out and focus more on the key drivers of what you're looking to buy from an investment that are going to get you the growth. Again, when you bring emotion in, that's when property prices or premiums can be paid for property, because the emotional attachment, and that's part of the reason we have a job from a buying perspective, from a home point of view, is to measure and to temper people's emotional attachments to properties and make sure that they're not getting too carried away. The next one is around advice from family and friends. And I always say this to clients, it is always coming from a very good place. It's very well-intentioned and well-meaning, and probably because they've had a successful outcome. But the thing to be mindful of is you don't know where that's come from, and you don't know whether it's going to be suitable for you. So there's a number of elements that probably need to be checked upon. Did they receive professional advice, or was it just purely a coincidence that they had a great objective buying a certain type of property? And did that come from a property professional, or did it come from a financial advisor? Sometimes from financial advisors' perspectives, there can be a vested interest in tipping or guiding someone in a certain direction. So getting a clear understanding of that is really important. How much homework have they done on this, and have they really understood why that type of property is the type, or why that approach to buying property is the way to go? The reasons for their recommendation, is it because they've had a good experience, or is it because someone else told them about why have they done that, and what are the likely outcomes that you could potentially achieve by going down this path? And was the advice tailored specifically for them? Because just because it suited them doesn't mean it's the right advice for you. And budgets can have a big influence on that. So whether or not they had a greater budget or a lesser budget than what you've got, it might mean that you've got greater potential to buy something else, or it may mean that you're restricted, and by buying something similar to them, you're buying something that's more compromised that they didn't have to do. So understanding that is really important too. So people, family, friends, it's very much well-meaning, but it can be a mistake if the advice isn't necessarily going to be suitable for you. And then the final one that I wanted to look on is something that we get, again, quite regularly, is from personal ideals. And I've mentioned that to a degree already, but allowing lifestyle decisions to influence an investment decision can be a big mistake, because what typically happens is we find that buyers are trying to make a property purchase fit multiple briefs. And what we inevitably find is that it doesn't end up suiting either of the briefs, and it doesn't work for any purpose. So it's things like, we might buy this property and use it ourselves down the track. So that could be for a multiple of reasons. It could be that you're wanting to buy a home that you'll use as a holiday home, or as perhaps a town base. And so by looking at it from multiple purposes, I can use that as ourselves. We'll use it as an investment property for the next 5 years, and then we'll go down the path of using it ourselves for lifestyle purposes for whatever reason. So we're trying to tick it from that. The other common one is, particularly for those that are living in a regional area, or even those that are metropolitan but are looking for an investment, is that we'll buy something that our kids will use from a university perspective. But you'd be surprised how early I hear that point made. And sometimes I've had clients come in and say, well, we would like to buy something that as an investment, but that our kids will use. And I'll say, okay, so are your kids at university next year? Oh, no, they're just starting primary school. So how they know what their kids are going to do down the track, whether or not they're actually going to go to university, they may prefer a trade, whether they're going to go to that city or even to that university that they have in mind, can be a really big risk. So it's great to be planning, but you've got to plan with all the information. And when you're making decisions around those sorts of things, it's not necessarily the right way to go. The other one is we'll buy this as an investment property for the time being, but we'll use it as a downsize when we get down the track. That's where we want to live at the moment. Now, again, great from a planning perspective, but life can throw up all sorts of changes in very short spaces of time, and it can change your objectives significantly, whether that's from personal needs, so what you think you might want to do or where you might want to live at the moment may change in 2, 3, 5, 10 years' time for differing reasons. Obviously, children, grandchildren, and being around them is really important. And if they move interstate or overseas, then that may influence where you've actually purchased. And so if you've gone down that downsize path, that may not necessarily then be where you want to be. And health changes. I mean, whether or not you'll need to be closer to certain medical facilities or those types of things, or whether or not changes to physical needs, so stairs are a big one in that regard, that can have a big influence on property selection as well. So it's great to plan, but make sure that the objective of the property is going to tick all boxes. And if you're going down the path of lifestyle, it needs to be purely more about lifestyle. If it's an investment property, then make it an investment property. Don't try and tick all boxes, because you'll end up finding that it doesn't meet either brief, and you'll compromise the property selection. Okay, so from today's case study point of view, rather than going down a specific case, I've gone down more of a generic path today, because this is a conversation that I've had many, many times with different people. So I thought this is a better way to go. We have a lot of people coming in, and obviously when they're looking to buy an investment property, they've got preconceived ideas from discussions that they've no doubt had with accountants and financial planners and brokers and things, it's great that there's always been a bit of pre-planning done. But the one common one, which I mentioned earlier, is around I need to save tax, I'm paying too much tax. And what can we do about that? I need to buy a property. So as I said before, that can't be the main objective. And that's what I talk to these clients about, is don't make this purely about tax and about depreciation benefits. Focus on the property, focus on the asset selection, focus on the capital growth, and then gain those benefits off the back of that. So don't come in here and tell me that you need to save tax on negative gearing, because all I'm going to say to you is, let's focus on the capital growth, and then we'll get the negative gearing benefits, depending upon what happens over the next couple of months with government changes. And then we'll get the depreciation benefits or the higher yield by improving an existing property that ticks the growth assets. And then we can improve the yield by increasing the quality of the kitchen or the bathroom. And we can get depreciation benefits because we've renovated the kitchen and the bathroom, and you can claim all those and get all the great benefit out of that, rather than going in and buying something off the plan, because that's going to get me the greatest depreciation benefits, when in actual fact, the reason you've purchased that property is it's going to actually start depreciating in value, and it's not going to achieve those assets or those attributes that you really wanted it to. See that with a lot of the block properties that have then resold. They've been purchased by a lot of these multi-millionaires because the depreciation benefits suit them, but as a wealth creation strategy, they're not suiting that purpose, and they're not growing in value the way that most people who are trying to create wealth through property would want to do it. Anyway, that's it for episode 119 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. As always, please feel free to share the podcast far and wide, and subscribe to all of our social media channels, particularly YouTube and Instagram, Facebook, those sorts of things. Otherwise, if you'd like further information, visit our website, wakeland.com.au. Otherwise, we wish you all the best with your property decisions.